Good afternoon. Next item of business is portfolio questions, and in order to get as many people in as possible to use a mantra, short questions and succinct answers would be a boon. So, I call number 1, Alison Harris.
Out on the Glasgow-Edinburgh via Falkirk rail line.
Secretary Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, following the severe weather last month, which led to the closure of the Edinburgh to Glasgow via Falkirk railway line, I visited the site last week to see firsthand the significant repair work that's presently been undertaken. Scottish Canals and Network Rail are currently undertaking the necessary repair work to the canal breach and the railway. We continue to press to ensure that Network Rail restore passenger services as quickly as possible. In the meantime, alternative transport options have been put in place, including other rail routes and replacement bus services for passengers travelling between Edinburgh and Glasgow and Dunblane.
Alison Harris.
Thank you. The Glasgow to Edinburgh rail link is vital for Scotland's economy and those living in the towns in between. It's not unreasonable for people to be angry that bad weather can close this line for weeks at a time. What plans does the Scottish Government have to focus investment on making this rail line more resilient? And what discussions has the Minister had with Network Rail about ensuring money can be directed into making this line better prepared for adverse weather in the future?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I can recognise the disruption and difficulty it's caused for my constituents in places such as Falkirk, given the line has been closed. The member will appreciate that both Scottish Canals and Network Rail have worked tirelessly over the last couple of weeks to repair the damage and also to repair what is almost 1 kilometre of the main line being swept away during the course of this period of adverse weather, which is a significant piece of undertaking from an engineering point of view to restore the route. What I can assure the member is that Network Rail and Scottish Canals are taking forward all the appropriate measures they can. The member may also be aware that actually in the high-level outputs that we place for Network Rail to take forward in Scotland, unlike other parts of the UK network, we specify climate change as one of the areas where they have to look at taking forward mitigation measures, and Network Rail are already undertaking that work across the network.
Thank you. Brief supplementary, Mark Ruskell, please.
Thanks. Following on from the drop in use during lockdown, there's a real risk that passengers will just stay away from rail services permanently, particularly given that the Dunblane-Edinburgh service is now taking 2 hours each way. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline what steps will be taken to incentivise and promote the use of rail once the repairs are complete?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Presiding Officer, the reality is that capacity in the rail network continues to be constrained, as is the case across the rest of the public transport network due to physical distancing. Clearly, as we move through the route map and the transport transition plan adapts to the stages of the route map, we will consider what further measures can be put in place to try to encourage people to return to rail and to other forms of public transport. Some thought has already been given to that, but I can assure the member that we are keen to make sure that those who have to make use of public transport at the present time should do so and feel safe in doing so. And once we move to the stage where we no longer have physical distancing, to encourage the public to start making use of public transport on a normal routine basis.
Question 2, Gordon MacDonald.
To ask the Scottish Government how it supports the provision of regular bus services in semi-rural areas such as Ratho in the Edinburgh-Pentlands constituency.
Cabinet Secretary.
We provide direct annual funding of around £53 million to support all bus services, including those in rural and semi-rural areas, and over £200 million to provide free bus travel for older and disabled people. We also fund local authorities through the General Revenue Grant to provide additional targeted support for services to meet local needs. In 2018-19, £57 million was provided in this way. During the pandemic, we have maintained levels of direct funding and have additionally committed up to £109.7 million over 20 weeks to ensure expanded services to enable people to travel safely while distancing.
Gordon MacDonald.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Many residents and commuters in the semi-rural areas of Edinburgh and my constituency are being discouraged from using public transport following the changes to the bus service provider that has resulted in an increased cost to commuters who travel into Edinburgh and within the city. What could help commuters is one ticket, an integrated public transport pass that has existed since 1998. However, it is not well known as its sales represent less than 1/3 of 1% of the local bus company's turnover. What can the Scottish Government do to help promote awareness and the use of one ticket to the residents of rural Edinburgh?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the member will be aware that One Ticket is actually an independent, commercially led ticketing venture, and it would be a matter for operators to decide on whether they wish to make use of such a provision. What the member may be aware of is that what we are seeing is an ever-increasing use of contactless payment across public transport, and alongside that we've also had the smart ticketing card provided, which allows a variety of different card-based public transport ticketing options to be used on one single smart card, which is the first of its type in the UK. That was rolled out last year, and it's one which can be used and accessed by all public transport operators in Scotland.
Question 3, Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of the potential benefits of improving the transport infrastructure in the south west of Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary.
The South West Scotland Transport Study, which concluded in January, emphasised the importance of a connected, safe, resilient and high-quality strategic transport network for the region. It recommended 23 interventions be taken forward for further detailed appraisal in the second Strategic Transport Projects Review. Studies of this kind, by their very nature, assess the potential benefits and impact of the interventions. Work has recently restarted on STPR2, and we intend to take a phased approach, with Phase 1 focused on recommendations which will lock in transport terms, the benefits and travel behaviours of individuals.
Brian Whittle.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer? There are 3 growth deals surrounding the South West worth in excess of £1.4 billion, yet the transport infrastructure in the South West remains woefully short of what is needed to support the South West economy, with Cairnryan being the biggest port in Scotland and the 3rd biggest in the UK, under threat from poor connectivity on the A77, 75 and the rail link. And Transport Scotland have warned that the Belfield interchange in Kilmarnock has already more traffic than it's designed for, even before these growth deals get underway. Yet the Scottish Government's investment in the South West sits at a mere 0.4%.
Mr Whittle, I'm sorry, this is for everybody. I did ask for short questions, and although we've added an extra 5 minutes, I'm going to be pressed to get everybody in with and supplementaries. So please shorten it.
Appreciate that. I'm nearly there, Presiding Officer. The investment in South West sits at a mere 0.04% of the investment over the last 10 years. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary when the Scottish Government will stop the anti-rhetoric that goes all the way back to a promise made by the then First Minister Alex Salmond 10 years ago, stop ignoring the needs of the South West and give us the same level of investment enjoyed in the rest of Scotland?
That's not a lesson on how to be brief, and I can have a reasonably short answer, Cabinet Secretary, if I may.
Presiding Officer, as the member is aware, we've already carried out the South West Scotland Strategic Transport Corridor Study, which has identified 23 options, part of which is improvements both to the A75 and the A77, including the A77, unlike his party leader yesterday, who appeared to be only looking for investment in the A75 for some reason. But what I can assure the member of is that we remain committed to making sure we take forward the STPR2 process, which will see investment be made in the A75 and the A77, unlike his proposal from his party leader.
I'll take 2 brief supplementaries. Colin Smith, followed by Emma Harper.
Thank you, President Officer. I'll happily join with the Cabinet Secretary in a photograph holding a sign saying Joe, the A75 and the A77 if he wants to. But he said that the STPR2 would be delayed. Can he confirm whether or not specific proposals on the A75 and the A77 will be contained within Phase 1, or those types of proposals for road upgrades, or will that be kicked into Phase 2, which is away into 2021 and people are sick of waiting?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the member will recognise is that staff who are undertaking this type of work have had to pivot towards dealing with the issues related to the pandemic, and I'm sure that as a member would recognise that is that staff in Transport Scotland and across local authorities and other public agencies are working extremely hard to deal with the pandemic, which has meant that some work has had to be paused, including some of the work that's associated with the STPR2 process. But in order to try and make sure we make as quick progress with it as possible, we're breaking it down into 2 phases. The early part next year will be about locking in some of the behavioural change elements that we've seen in recent months to try and make sure that we build on that. and the second part of it will come later in the year. But I'm sure the member will recognise that staff are doing their very best to try and deal with issues related to the pandemic and at the same time to start this work again in order to make sure we drive forward the STPR2 process to drive improvement right across Scotland, including within the south west of Scotland.
Emma Harper.
Quick sup, Presiding Officer, thank you. To ask the Cabinet Secretary whether he has been in discussion with the UK Government in relation to additional infrastructure requirements for the Port of Cairnryan after December 31st this year.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, we have had no direct ministerial engagement on the issue of Cairnryan, despite the fact that we've raised this matter with them and given their recent announcements in relation to the possibility of a customs point being introduced on the Northern Ireland side. It's an issue that the UK Government need to seek to address as quickly as possible, and as yet we have not received any further assurances around what action they intend to take.
Question 4, Annie Wells.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of any potential benefits of improving transport links between Glasgow and Edinburgh.
Cabinet Secretary.
We have already invested significantly in improving transport links between Glasgow and Edinburgh with delivery of the Edinburgh-Glasgow Improvement Programme. The £850 million rail investment has brought the fastest journey times between Glasgow and Edinburgh city centres, as well as an increased capacity with more comfortable, efficient and reliable trains, and ensuring that all routes between the two cities are electrified. In addition, the £500 million M8, M73, M74 motorway improvement project improved road journey times and reliability across central Scotland. The second Strategic Transport Projects Review is considering what further transport investments should be made.
Annie Wells.
Presiding Officer, as we've heard, there are major disruptions on the Glasgow to Edinburgh train line as we speak, and the M8 doesn't have the capacity to deal with increased demand at peak times. The key to increased economic activity is having transport links to support businesses and workers in the area, which is why we are calling for an acceleration of infrastructure projects, including a 3-lane M8. These plans, in the words of a Scottish Government advisor, would generate more economic growth and create more jobs.
No, that's not a question.
Will the Scottish Government accept that our proposals are the right thing to do and take them forward without delay?
Thank you. Tell members you cut other members out. You waffle on. Crisp questions. And the same for Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I am aware that the key commitment that the Conservative Party have brought forward in terms of infrastructure investment is to have a third lane introduced onto the M8. And the reality is that if you want to introduce a third lane on the M8, it means there's no money for the upgrade of the A77 or the A75, or for investing in the North East for the A96, or to complete the dualling of the A9, or to see other big strategic investments we're making in health and education. The reality is that what's being proposed by the Conservative Party on a third lane on M8 is something that's been created on the back of a fag packet, and is not the type of investment that will deliver the change that we need right across Scotland, including in the south-west of the country, the north and the Highlands, and in the north-east, and in the east and the west of Scotland. That's the reality of the approach we are taking, rather than the very silly approach and very childish approach taken by the Conservative Party in this issue.
Now, what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander here, so everybody listen. I'm trying to get through them. Question 5, Gordon Lyndhurst.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it has reviewed the uses to which the Spaces for People programme has been put since it was established, and whether this includes safety and cost effectiveness.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, Spaces for People was established as an emergency response to the COVID-19 outbreak and is enabling local authorities to quickly implement pop-up active travel measures that support physical distancing. These local schemes are the responsibility of individual local authorities. Sustrans is offering support to monitor projects and is working closely with the Society of Chief Officers of Transportation in Scotland and Transport Scotland to deliver an evaluation of the programme. Local authorities have a legislative duty to ensure road safety in all schemes and are required to follow public procurement processes to ensure value for money.
Gordon Lyndhurst.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Across Edinburgh, from Comiston and Braid Roads to East Craigs, residents have been shocked by the random council-styled temporary measures flung onto the streets of our city, leading to unsafe pavements and roads, congestion and increased air pollution, and hazards to the elderly and disabled, such as floating bus stops. What will the Scottish Government do to ensure that funds it provides are used in a less wasteful manner and for properly planned programmes for more pedestrian and cyclist-friendly spaces for people?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, proposals and schemes that are brought forward for local authorities are matters for the local authority, having gone through the process with Sustrans in order to secure funding for such schemes. There are three broad criteria that need to be met in dealing with that, and part of that also includes making sure that it addresses any issues regarding disability and access issues. So any matters relating to the schemes that the member makes reference to are matters for Edinburgh City Council.
Question 6, Claire Baker.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to ensure that capacity on public transport allows commuters to travel safely as part of its planning for the reopening of non-essential offices.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the COVID pandemic has had a significant impact on our transport system as travel demand has fallen. This is why we have committed up to £487 million of additional financial support to date for public transport services to support operators while fare box revenues are impacted. We have also committed a further £10 million for temporary bus priority to help ensure public transport remains an attractive choice. Transport Scotland officials are working collaboratively with the Scottish Chamber of Commerce and the STUC to plan for safe, phased reopening of remaining offices and to inform route map review decisions.
Claire Baker.
Thank you. While today has seen a pause in moving out of lockdown, at some point non-essential office-based work will resume and we'll see an increase of travellers on the Fife Circle, which, as the Cabinet Secretary knows, is usually a busy peak time service. Can I ask, when people return to distance workplaces, will the same rules continue to apply on public transport, or will capacity only be sufficient once there is no social distancing?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I recognise the issues that the member raises in terms of the Fife Circle. I do also recognise that both Network Rail and ScotRail have achieved significant improvements on the line in recent times. Notwithstanding that, though, the reality is that while physical distancing continues to be required on public transport, capacity will be constrained. And that's why we have provided offers around financial support and to support things such as bus prioritisation for local authorities to look at how they can help to improve the offer on public transport, particularly in bus, to help to support additional capacity where necessary. However, while non-essential offices may open, we are still advocating and encouraging businesses to support people to continue to work from home where possible, to look at options in terms of staggered start and finish times in order to try and help to reduce the demand that can be experienced at peak times. So I do recognise the issues. It's a matter which has been addressed through the Transport Transition Plan, but there will be challenges with the limited capacity on the public transport network, and we're doing work in order to try and maximise capacity as much as we can, but it will still be constrained, and that's why businesses and others need to think about their travelling time and, where possible, supporting and encouraging staff to continue to work from home while physical distancing must be maintained.
Gill Patterson, it must be brief.
Many thanks, Presiding Officer. It's evident that public transport will continue to be impacted by the need for physical distancing. Therefore, can the Cabinet Secretary outline how the Scottish Government will engage with the transport providers and members of the public to ensure that public confidence in public transport is maintained?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, my officials meet on a regular basis with public transport providers such as Network Rail, ScotRail, bus and light rail operators at a senior level in order to look at available capacity and its utilisation, and whether there are further measures that could be put in place in order to enable the public to have confidence in the use of public transport. I can assure the member that we have taken forward a range of measures in order to encourage transport operators to adapt the way and the routines of how they operate services to provide the public with confidence and also to meet demand where necessary. And as I just mentioned, we've also provided additional funding to support local authorities in looking at developing bus priority rapid deployment through the Bus Priority Rapid Deployment Fund in order to help to support them in looking at how they can improve and increase bus services on key routes.
Question 7, Richard Lyle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussion re noise mitigation it is having with Scottish Roads Partnership in light of recent publication of increased noise levels being experienced by residents beside the Uddingston section of the M74.
A little tweaking of the wording there, but it's not sufficient to make a fuss about. Cabinet Secretary.
My officials are continuing discussions with the Scottish Roads Partnership to understand the results from its post-construction noise survey in this area of the M74 following the opening of the M8, M73, M74 motorway improvement project. Transport Scotland has requested a full explanation from SRP regarding the outcome of the survey and will provide an update as soon as possible. This is a subject that requires to be assessed by appropriately a qualified specialist, and my officials will take independent special advice in considering any further necessary measures.
Richard Lyle.
Cabinet Secretary, the M74 was the only motorway upgraded without noise-suppressing fencing. My constituents have suffered increased noise. Many trees and bushes were removed, not replaced, or replaced with what I call twigs. Other planting was carried out due to my pressure. As the noise reports support my position, what more is intended to be done to reduce noise, and when will noise-suppressing fencing be finally installed, which I have pressed for previously?
Cabinet Secretary.
So I can assure the member that I know he's been a long-standing representative, it's been a long-standing issue for the member in challenging the way in which the Scottish Road Partnership have taken forward some of the noise mitigation measures on this section of the M74. What I can assure the member of is that Transport Scotland officials are engaging directly with the Scottish Road Partnership in order to interrogate the findings from the noise surveys that have been undertaken and to identify what actions they are going to take in order to mitigate the difficulties which have been identified. So I can assure the member that we will continue to press Scottish Road Partnership to ensure that appropriate measures are taken on the basis of the findings from the noise survey.
And question 8, Liam Kerr, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the Stonehaven train crash.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, firstly, my thoughts continue to remain with the family and friends of those affected by this tragic incident. I visited the site on Monday to show my support to those involved in the investigation, recovery and service restoration. The site remains under the control of Police Scotland and the Rail Accident Investigation Branch. The removal of the carriages has now started and will continue over the coming days. Network Rail advised the restoration of passenger services is currently planned for October.
Liam Kerr.
Cabinet Secretary, for that update. In harrowing and tragic circumstances, the railway family and all our emergency services were challenged in the extreme that day and beyond, and their commitment and courage has been rightly noted. Grant Shapps, the Secretary of State for Transport, met Officer Liam Mercer, who was one of the first on the scene, and I understand intends to write to the Chief Constable recommending a commendation for his bravery and that of Officer Ailey McCabe. Would the Cabinet Secretary consider writing to the Chief Constable in support of that recommendation?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I met with Lee Mercer on the day of the incident myself and the other officers who responded to the incident on the day, alongside those within the railway industry who responded to this tragic incident. And I'm very conscious of the very significant efforts that they have all made in responding to this incident and the heroic nature of the way in which they went about dealing with what was a very complex and tragic event in itself. What I can assure the member is that I've already asked for measures to be taken to recognise all of those who responded to this incident in an exemplary way in order to recognise the outstanding contribution and bravery which they demonstrated on the day in dealing with this tragic matter.
Thank you. And that concludes portfolio questions. And we managed to get through all the questions again. It's time to move on to the next item of business very shortly after a pause.